a human rights activist, and Mr. Murad Ismail, Executive Director for Yazda, and Mr. Mirza Ismail from the Yazidi Human Rights Organization International, and joining us by video conference from Vancouver, Mr. David Berson, co-chair of the Or Shalom Refugee Initiative. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses for appearing before us today on this very important study. And I'd just like to remind witnesses that they have 7 minutes for opening statements. I will begin with Ms. Nadia Murad as soon as she's ready. I'd just like to remind the members that they'll have to have their earpieces to hear the translation of Ms. Murad's testimony.
Mr. President, would you like her to speak in Arabic or in Kurdish? Because if she does Kurdish, I will be translating for her. If she does Arabic, then will be your translate.
The translation is from
Arabic to English.
Translation is Arabic to English.
صباح الخير على الجميع.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy today to be in a country like Canada and to be among you this morning. I'd like to thank you for your support of the minorities that are subjected to criminal acts committed against them. I'd like also to thank you for the good work that you are doing for our cause. I'd like to thank Michelle, Rona, and everyone that stands for the truth. My name is Nadia Murad. I am from the Yazidi minority. I'm 22 years old. I lived in Singar in northern Iraq in one of the Yazidi villages, the village of Kudu. I was a student on the fifth class. I was so happy with the life among my family and friends in the village. We lived peacefully. And as a peaceful society, we lived together with the Muslims, in Bashika, in Bazana, also with the Christians, with everybody, basically all the other minorities. We coexisted peacefully. On the 3rd of August 2014, ISIL attacked the Yazidis, and they killed more than 4,000 members of the Yazidi communities, as well as explosions. More than 4,000 Yazidi individuals ran to the mountains. And in one of the hottest days of the year, and more than 6,000 women and children were taken as hostages simply because of our religious identity. ISIL acted with the Yazidis in a very different way from the other minorities, because they consider them to be infidels or kafirs. So when they were attacked, the goal of ISIL was to destroy the Yazidi identity and to kill all men, and to take girls and children as hostages. And in fact, that's what happened to me. I was in the village along with more than 1,700 individuals, and we were sieged for 2 weeks Under the control of ISIL, we asked for help from all aspects, on all sides, because we knew that our destiny would be for the men to be killed and for the women and children to be taken hostages. We asked for help, but unfortunately we did not get help. On August 15th, they gathered us at the village school. They separated the men from the women. They killed our men, more than 700 men. In a matter of 2 hours, were killed in the village of Kutu. We saw our fathers, our brothers, our sons getting killed at the outskirts of the village. Then they took us, the women and children, and they divided us up, so by age. So girls from the age of 9 to 25 or 27 years of age were taken to Mosul. As for the older women, more than 80 of them, because they were older, they were killed. The male children were taken to the training camps. The married women who had more than 3 children each, they took them to a different location, and they acted towards them just like girls, but after 40 days, they basically violated them because they were with the Yazidis. So this is what happened as far as my village is concerned. And this is the same story that got repeated in hundreds of other Yazidi villages where thousands of people were killed in Sibai, in Gerazer, in Hardan, in all the other Yazidi villages. Thousands of Yazidi people in Bashiqa and Badan had to be displaced. When they took us, the girls and children, we were not simply held prisoners, but they committed their crimes against us. They forced us to change our religion. They raped us. They sold us. They leased us. And this continues today against more than 3,000 women and children in both Iraq and Syria. There is no place in Iraq or Syria that's under the control of ISIL where girls were not distributed. Girls that are 10 years old, they were in my company, and they would be raped, they would be sold among themselves. Some girls today, until today, have been and continue to be raped by tens of ISIL members. And this is not secretive. It's done in public. ISIL videographs the girls, and they're proud of what they're doing towards those girls. Thousands of other Yazidis in the camps, they struggle with extreme poverty. Thousands of Yazidis had to migrate. Hundreds were drowned in the Aegean Sea. Hundreds of them, in fact, thousands of the widows in the camps are not able to raise their children. More than 35 group cemeteries have been discovered so far in the areas that have been liberated in Singar, and they have not been documented to the date. The grave where my mother is buried for more than 9 months, I know that my mother is there, buried there, but she has not been properly identified. So imagine a human being having to see more than 6 or 7 of their siblings killed, and you're not able to even go to collect their remains. You see your mother that had been killed with no guilt other than the Yazidi identity that's considered as infidels. We're talking about not being able to buy a container of milk for the children in the camps in Greece and Turkey and Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan. Yazidis are being eliminated since August 3rd, 2014 until now. There is no Yazidi child that is being helped by any side. Yazidis are not getting help from anyone. We're talking about girls that have been raped tens of times, and they're currently in the camps of Iraqi Kurdistan. They've lost their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, and they are living just like other refugees in the camps after having been the victims of ISIL. And they're not receiving any help or any assistance. I know of girls that have been liberated. They're in the camps. There is nobody to help them. As Yazidis, we feel that the world is negligent towards us, especially when it comes to the survivors, the widows, the orphans. We do not know for how long we will continue to be in this situation where we're being killed off. The campaign to eliminate us continues. For more than a week, I've been considering. 2 years ago, about the same time, 2 years ago, I used to study. I was on a vacation from study, but I was a student, and I was getting ready to go to grade 6. And during my vacation, I was preparing myself by studying so that I would get good grades once I make it to grade 6. But 15 days after that, we were attacked by ISIS or ISIL. I could not even see my books. I would have hoped to be able to obtain the certificate from my school so that I could show it to my mother. But that very school, I was not able to get the certificate from that school. And in that very school, I got separated from my family and friends and village residents. I could not even have the chance to say goodbye to my mother. 6 of my siblings were in the school. They had been going to that school, and I saw them being taken in cars to face death. I could not even have the chance to say goodbye to them. And for more than a year, our children have been brainwashed in the ISIL camps, and the world is silent about this. Frankly speaking, I don't know what else to tell you about this kind of suffering, about the very painful cases that I witnessed among women and children, young women and children. The whole world is negligent when it comes to standing for the rights of the Yazidis. We are a peaceful community that we have been subjected to more than 74 genocide, and we continue to put up with this genocide. It's our hope that one day the world would feel our situation and would see how a peaceful community like us is facing genocide for no reason other than being of a different religion. We only want to live peacefully. That's the only thing we want. There is no one in the world that would accept for their daughter to be held as a hostage for more than a year in the hands of terrorists, or to see a wife being taken hostage by terrorists. Women, their husbands were killed before their very eyes, and they were taken hostages, and then they are being raped. When I was besieged, I heard that thousands of girls had been taken as hostages. I thought, well, maybe they would take me as a hostage, and perhaps I would try to reason with them, try to convince them that I am a human being, that I have committed nothing to deserve to be raped, to be sold for nothing. I was saying that I would try to reason with ISIL because they are human beings, but when they took me away, they did not give me any chance to say anything, to say I am a young girl, I have the right to live. But when ISIL did not give me the chance to hear to me, I said, I'm going to talk to the world, and the world would understand me. For more than 6 months, I went to more than 17 countries, talking to presidents, to parliamentarians, other people, to say, listen up, we're talking about girls that are being raped in the jails of ISIL, people that are dying of starvation in the camps, thousands of children that have been deprived of education. And the world is simply silent, quiet about it, quiet about our right as Yazidis.
Difficult testimony. Thank you. Mr. Ismail, and I'd like to remind that there's 7 minutes for your testimony. Thank you.
Mr. President, honorable members of the Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be here and to testify after a remarkable woman that I've been with her for the past 7 months, that I see her tragedy every day, that with every speech that she gives some of her soul, that she gives so much of her emotions to pass the story of thousands of people like herself, that thousands of the children who became orphans, the thousands of women who were enslaved, the story of men who, like her own brother that I met a week ago, who's still waiting for his wife that has been captured, that's been taken by a militant from the Islamic State. Listening to Nadia after this testimony that is so deep, it's hard to put my own testimony in words. And in fact, I've been having very hard time to put my own testimony in words for the past 2 years. I'm a geophysicist who came from Sinjar, who had a normal life in Houston, who was going to the University of Houston to receive education. I received 2 masters in geophysics and engineering, and I wanted to have a normal life in the US. But that normal life changed in one moment. And that normal life changed for me, for my family, that changed for every Yazidi on this planet. What happened to the Yazidi people was a genocide. And the purpose of this genocide was to wipe the Yazidi people from the face of the planet. And ISIS said in Dabiq, in their journal, that the purpose of this attack was to wipe out the Yazidis. And in fact, they said that the existence of the Yazidis within the Muslim world was a shame on Islam, and the Muslim must have eradicated the Yazidis in the past. For a community of 700,000 people, a community that is more than 4,000 years old, coming from the history of Mesopotamia that we are all proud of, the history of the Babylon, the history of the Assyrians, a community that we all should be proud of its heritage, now finding itself on a crossroad. And when we say that we don't know what the future will look like for us, we indeed mean it. When we say that Yazidis will probably be wiped out in 10 or 20 years, we mean it. The Yazidis had more than 200,000 people in Turkey, and now there are only 300 families in Turkey. In Syria, we had 50,000 people. Now we have 3,000 people. In Sheikhan district, we had 200,000 people or 300,000 people. Now we have 100,000 people. And that's also for the city of Sinjar, where the majority basically systematically changed the demographic so the Yazidis will not have a homeland. ISIS attack on the Yazidi was the last straw, was the last attack to wipe the Yazidis from the Middle East. It has been recognized by the United Nations. It has been recognized by other countries. It has been documented through my work, through our work as Yazda at Indahok, where we received more than 900 women like Nadia. We have their accounts, and they've all faced the exact same thing that Nadia faced. In fact, that Nadia was lucky comparing to others. I met girls who were at 8 years old who were raped. I met children who come back from captivity who still pray the way that Daesh trained them to pray. I was just a week ago, I met 5 beautiful women with their children, none of them older than 7 or 8, 10 years old. They've all lost their husbands. 2 of girls, Jilan and Shilan, they both committed suicide in captivity. 2 of their children, Rezan, and another one of their children who were students at the medical school in Mosul who were killed when ISIS attacked. What Yazidis need from the world is a stand for humanity. The Yazidis must be seen as human beings, not seen as a distant community that must face this alone. I think for us as human beings, looking in this tragedy and not doing anything, it's shame on us, all of us. What we would like from Canada to do is to, first, we were surprised that the resolution that was put on the floor, that was objected, that was not, the genocide against the Yazidi people was not recognized in the parliament. And we were surprised that a country like Canada will not see our tragedy. And it's very important for the thousands of people who survived to find the recognition from the Canadian people and the Canadian government. And for the Parliament to be the voice of the Canadian people, we would like that resolution to pass, and we would like that resolution to be reintroduced. We are also here because we have thousands of people who put their lives at risk for immigration. And we would like Canada to have a quota for the Yazidis, between 5,000 to 10,000 people, to be able to immigrate to Canada. And they are beautiful people. Trust me that they will contribute into the success and democracy of your country, and they will be good part of this country. You have about 2,000 to 3,000 Yazidis here in Canada, and they are integrated community in Canada. We would like this quota to be especially for the victims, like the German program that brought 1,100 women and girls who were victims of rape. For people who are in Turkey now, waiting for the UN process is not a solution. The Yazidis, even when they are very lucky, when they have few dollars to go to the interview, they have to wait until 2022 to be interviewed for the first time through the UN system. Leaving the Yazidis in this situation is not the right solution. We would like you to have a special quota for 5,000 to 10,000 people, sponsored by the government of Canada, and also to have to allow the Yazidis to come. I think the Yazidis must be allowed to go to any country, just exactly as the people of the Holocaust, where the world finally recognized their genocide and allowed them to come in. Those are my two main points, and the last point will be help the Yazidi communities who will stay in the camps. Help the Yazidi community to refer the case to the International Criminal Court. We've asked the world to look into these crimes, to look into these mass graves, and there has been still no investigations. We would like Canada to take the lead on the ICC case and to take the lead on the documentation of the genocide, and also take the lead on the immigration. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ismail. Mr. Ismail, 7 minutes, please.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Chair Boris, committee members, honored guests, I am honored to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to speak at CIMA meeting on the situation of the Yazidi refugees in Turkey, Syria, and Greece, and IDP in northern Iraq. I also would like to thank our respected Canadian government last June for recognizing and declaring actually the ISIS committed genocide after the UN declared. So I would like to thank our government for declaring that. These are indeed the victims of genocide. We Yazidis are a nation and proud people from the heart of Mesopotamia, the birthplace of the civilization and the birthplace of many of the world's religions. We believe in Supreme God and God's seven archangels. The Yazdi is a religion, a culture, and a language. We Yazdi are desperately for your immediate and help and support. During our 6,000 years old history, the Yazdi have faced 74 genocide in the Middle East, including the ongoing genocide. Why? Simply because we are not Muslims. Yes, some of you may ask, there are many other, even like Shia Muslim are facing this one. Yeah, this conflict has been between Shia and Sunni for centuries. But when they commit genocide against us, they do it because we are not Muslim, because we are Yazdi. We Yazdi are considered infidels by Sharia law, or what they call the people without book, whether they are Yazdi, Hindus, Buddha, Sikh, etc. And so they are encouraged to kill, rape, enslave, and convert us. On June 23, 2016, in the Sakramenkas camp, refugee in Greece, the Arabs, the Kurds, and Afghans carried and called on jihad to kill the Yazdi in the camp. These Muslim jihadists attacked the Yazdi refugees with knives, metal bars, wood stick, and stones. They injured 18 Yazdi men who tried to defend their family and their people. The 18 injured men were taken to the hospital for medical treatment. They also ravaged their tent and belongings. The attack started at 9:30 and ended at 3 a.m. on June 24th. But this is not the first time attack against the Yazdi refugees in Greece. There has been attack against the Yazdi and violence against the Yazdi refugees in Greece, in Turkey, and in Syria, and even in Germany, many times, by ISIS supporters or ISIS members in those countries. There are about 750 Yazdi refugees in Sakramenkas camp, and there are in total about 3,363 Yazdi refugees in Greece. This is happening in Greece despite that the fact Greece is not a Muslim country. So how about the other country, like, for example, like Turkey or Syria? So if that could happen in Greece, so can you imagine what's happening? And you can see on the screen those pictures of the victims of the ISIS attack, members or supporters in Greece. Most of the staff of the UNHCR in Turkey and in Syria are Muslims and bluntly discriminate against the Yazdi, who do not dare to protest their ill treatment or demand their rights. They are given 4 to 5 years for the UN interview, and I have evidence. I am happy to show anyone who wants to see it. There are thousands of Yazdi refugees currently languishing in Turkey, Syria, and Greece. At the top of the threatened list and persecuted list are the Yazdi. Then come Kildua Syrian and Mandians. More than 5,000 Yazdi were murdered by ISIS in August of 2014, and more than 3,000 are still enslaved, mostly are young women and children. Humanitarian aid, while necessary, is not sufficient. Much of the humanitarian aid distributed by the Kurdish Regional Authority and Iraqi government never gets into the hands of those who need it, those for whom it was intended, due to skimming, corruption, and politics. If humanitarian is the chief reason being cited in accepting the refugee, the Yazdi should receive priority simply because they are the most vulnerable and persecuted in the Middle East. And they are the ones who have nowhere else to go. There are thousands of young Yazdi women, girls, and children who, as I speak, have been enslaved and forced into sexual slavery. These girls are subject to daily, multiple times rapes by ISIS monsters. According to many escaped women and girls whom I met within northern Iraq. The abducted Yazidi girls, mostly young women and children, number over 7,000 at the beginning. Some of those women and girls have had to watch 7, 8, and 9 years old children bleed to death before their eyes after being raped by ISIS militia multiple times a day. I met mothers whose children were torn from them by ISIS. These same mothers came and plead for the return of their children, only to be informed that they, the mothers, had been fed with the flesh of their own children. Children murdered, then fed their own mother. ISIS militia have burned many Yazidi girls alive for refusing to convert and marry ISIS men. Young Yazidi boys are being trained to be jihadists and suicide bombers. The entire Yazidi population of Mount Sinjar was displaced in less than 1 day on August 3, 2014. On August 2, 2014, on the eve of ISIS attack against the Yazidi in Sinjar region, more than 10,000 of local authority forces were present, allegedly there to protect the Yazidi. The Yazidi tried desperately to flee for their lives to Mount Sinjar, but the KRG militia didn't allow it. At about 10 p.m., they escaped back to KRG region, and they refused to give any weapon to the Yazidi to defend themselves against ISIS. They trapped them. They trapped the children and women. For them, it became a waiting room for death and carnage at the hands of ISIS. The Yazidi who begged and pleaded for a weapon to save themselves and their people were killed like dogs by Peshmerga. Thousands of men were killed on the spot, including beheading of hundreds. The UN estimates 5,000 Yazidi were murdered and thousands of women and children taken hostage. Today, I am pleading with each and every one of you in the name of humanity to lend us your support at this crucial time, to save the indigenous and peaceful people of the Middle East, the Yazidi, the Kildua Syrian, and the Mandians. Our demand from the Kenyan government is to bring as many Yazidi refugees from Turkey, Syria, and Greece as possible, because they are the most vulnerable group and their lives are in danger. If the Yazidi can be attacked in Greece, how about the Yazidi refugees in Turkey and Syria, which are Muslim countries? We ask Canada to bring the abducted Yazidi who were able to escape from ISIS. Canada can bring them, those escaped girls, even from Iraq, under Section 25 of the immigration law. As my colleague said, Germany has accepted 1,000 and the underage with their families, so why Canada can't do that? We ask the Canadian government to be the leading hand in rescuing more than 3,000 Yazidi who are still being held in captivity by ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and monitor the ISIS border so the ISIS doesn't transport them to different countries. Humanitarian aid must be sent immediately and directly to those internally displaced Yazidi, and especially to the Yazidis in Mount Sinjar in northern Iraq. The KRG has put food sanction on the Yazidis there. There is an imminent threat of starvation, dehydration, and disease. We ask our government to intervene with the Iraqi government and support the creation of an autonomous region for the Yazidi Kildua Syrian in Sinjar and Nineveh Plain, under the protection of international forces and directly tied to Baghdad's central government. This right is guaranteed under the Iraqi Constitution, Article 125. It needs implementation. This is the only way we can survive in our homeland in the Middle East. Thank you so much for listening and for your careful consideration going forward. We beseech you to act with the greatest urgency to help save the remnants of our Yazidi nation, of the Kildua Syrian and other minorities who face the same thing. Only with your help after we have experienced so much death and suffering, is there a possibility of peaceful life going forward for our people? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ismail. And now we will go to Mr. David Burson. 7 minutes, please.
Good morning, bonjour, members of the House of Commons Standing Committee and honored witnesses. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. Immigration is a part of Canada's story. Refugees are part of Canada's story. My name is David Burson. I'm a member of the Or Shalom Syrian Refugee Initiative. Or Shalom is an East Side Vancouver synagogue that has 180 members, is of modest means, and has a deep commitment to building community, pursuing social justice, and repairing the world. Many of our members come from families of origin that have migrated, fled persecution and genocide, and experienced discrimination abroad as well as when arriving in Canada. We understand and appreciate how precious our lives are here as Canadians and welcome the efforts being made to improve our country's record of resettling immigrants, especially vulnerable refugees who are in inaccessible areas. Our synagogue is sponsoring 4 families, 2 families of 4 and 5 members in the Kurdish area of northern Iraq, 1 family of 5 in eastern Turkey. These families are Kurdish Syrians and have family members in Metro Vancouver. Our 4th family is an LGBT couple presently in Beirut. We do our work in partnership and collaboration with the United Church and Rainbow Refugees. 18 months ago, members of our synagogue, in partnership with our local Tibetan community, resettled 2 displaced Tibetan women who came from remote areas of northeastern India. Our group raised additional funds so that we could provide training grants for these new Canadians by embarking on a trek to those remote areas. We showed up so that they could show up. The Old Testament mentions 30 times, "Do not ill-treat a stranger or oppress him, for you were once strangers in a strange land." Sometimes, said our former Minister of Justice, the Honorable Irwin Cotler, you need to get a taste of injustice to have urgency to fight against it. Our community has done so countless times during our history in Canada, together with many other Canadians. For the purpose of my presentation this morning, vulnerable means families whose lives have been disrupted too many times by traumatic transitions. Families with young children living with critical health issues and dwindling resources. Families in despair, such as Alan Abdul Rahim, a toddler who had heart surgery at the age of 1 and requires stable and accessible medical care. Or his father, Adnan, who suffers from a serious respiratory condition and is limited in his mobility and physical activity. A distant hope they have, emigrating to Canada. Inaccessible in our case refers to areas where our families reside, which is the Kurdish region of Iraq, areas apparently inaccessible to our IRCC and consular staff. According to the Interagency Information Sharing Portal for the Syrian Regional Refugee Response, 249,395 refugees are in the Kurdish region of Iraq, including the regions of Erbil, Duhok, and Sulmania. 88,772 households. This is the population of Gatineau, a stone's throw from where you sit today. Despite specific suggestions to the Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, and despite opportunities to partner with a myriad of agencies on the ground in northern Iraq, more than 100 individuals, Kurdish Syrian refugees, still await processing. These are individuals that are sponsored by families in Metro Vancouver. Dear Standing Committee members, there are more humanitarian and government organizations and agencies involved in operations and services than there are letters in the alphabet. In Metro Vancouver, private sponsors have mobilized more than 3,000 people to participate in these resettlement. We've raised more than $775,000 and are prepared to do more. We've educated ourselves in terms of language, food, culture. We've been active from long before November 2015, and we are ready to deploy. Change is needed in how we expedite the processing of vulnerable populations in isolated areas. Here are some recommendations and possible solutions to consider. Increase the number of private sponsorships allowed to sponsorship agreement holders, because private sponsors significantly increase the acculturation process to Canada, even more so in cases where people are vulnerable and have special needs. Private sponsorships cost the government and taxpayers much less, and they develop more resilient communities and stronger community networks. Encourage support and collaboration with agencies in isolated areas such as northern Iraq. Recognize internally displaced people as candidates for sponsorship. Take the UNHCR and the IOM to interview these folks and get the ball rolling. Accept the UNHCR's designation in places where we as Canadians do not have processing centers. If we cannot send personnel, then interview the people by telephone. Use existing UNHCR refugee camp mechanisms to accelerate security processing and vulnerability assessment. UNHCR has already introduced a digitalized protection monitoring tool to assess for vulnerability and identify the needs. There are 99% of the people in the camps have been scanned for these records. Prioritize cases by expediting the ones that have the most sponsors or the most people actively engaged in sponsorship in Canada. Waive transportation loans for the most vulnerable refugees. Rent special armored personnel vehicles to transport Canadian staff so they can safely travel to this area and interview vulnerable families. And finally, a rather irksome suggestion. On numerous occasions, I've thought to myself, being a philanthropic advisor, that perhaps we could embark upon a fundraising campaign to help the IRCC. We will support your efforts. Let our people go, so that we can tell our children and yours that our values called out to us and we acted, so that we can say with pride that our Canadian teams on the ground, well aware of the dangers, took the risks to save the lives of vulnerable people.
Thank you, Mr.
So we can say that together with our government, we made miracles happen. Let us resolve that vulnerable refugees' lives matter. Let's resolve to do something. Finally, I urge you to be decisive in your deliberations and recommendations. Erwin Kotler said of the present crisis and the inaction of the world community that we are living in the time of bystander leadership. Let us not be bystanders. Let us enact the responsibility to protect. As our sages taught, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, who am I? If not now, when? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burson. We'll now proceed to the round of questions to the witnesses, and Mr. Tabara, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you for all the witnesses for being here today. The tragic events that keep unfolding in Iraq and Syria are very disturbing. I want to thank Nadia Murad for her bravery and for raising awareness around the world of the plight of the Yazidis. The UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon has spoken of your strength and your courage and your dignity, all of which that was witnessed here. Ms. Murad, you mentioned during your recent appearance at the UN and here today that you lived in peace and that you were happy and that you did not want to be a refugee. There are currently more than 300 million displaced in Iraq, many of whom are in the northern region of Kurdistan. Their local government has publicly spoken about the funding deficiencies, and even with the recent flare-up in Fallujah, there's been many conflict going on there. And I have this article here from Al Jazeera from Sheikh Mohammed Hadi, and some of the things that he mentioned in this article is that in Fallujah right now it's really a catastrophe there. The resources are not enough, and we can only provide for 30% of the displaced. Hadi called upon the international community to help the Iraqi government in dealing with the internally displaced people. So this is what the committee is we're here today to talk about the IDPs, the internationally displaced people, and how we can better assist them. The current government of Canada has increased its humanitarian aid for Iraq to an unprecedented level of 1.6 billion. It provides training and troops fighting Daesh, including helping the Peshmerga forces. And it is working with local governments for stabilization and development. Would you say that the whole of this government approach is including diplomacy, humanitarian aid, and political negotiations and training? Is this a good way to ensure long-term peace in Iraq? And this is to Ismail as well. Both of you.
Perhaps we can start
With I'll go with Ismail. Yeah.
Well, I think, as you said, like about the IDPs in, like, especially who are displaced in northern Iraq, you can help, but at the same time, not just to deal with the government. The aid that goes to the government, it doesn't reach to the people who need it.
The humanitarian aid, you mean, or
Yes, humanitarian aid, medical aid. So you can send team with it. Like, we have many NGO in Canada, in US, or work with other NGOs to make sure that the aid actually reaches the people. We have many people, they scream. Some of them, they don't have 2 meals a day. But on the other hand, like, us all is politics. If I am not affiliated with one of the politics there, I am lost. They don't give me. So you have to do something. Like, we hope that the international community could send direct aid with the people from here, from the United States, from the Europe, to make sure that the aid actually reaches the people. Like, in September 2014 and November, Shri Ravi Shankara Hindu Guruji donated about 110 tons of food and clothing. He went with the food there, with the aid there, to make sure that the people receive it. On the other hand, they give to government some, then the government distributed probably about maybe less than 10%. As soon as the official left, the government took the rest. They don't tell you that, but they give you the picture that when they distributed that, less than 10%. The aid doesn't reach them.
So what I'm getting from you is that you're saying that there's a lot of corruption, and
There is a
the
lot
aid
of
that is
corruption.
being sent
Yes.
is not directed to people
That's
that need
right.
it the most.
Yes.
So what kind of suggestions would you give Canada
We
and the
suggest-
international community to make sure that the aid that we have increased recently does reach the people and does go
Yeah,
to
we
people that need
suggest
help the
that whether Canada or US or Europe, to work with the community here, to work with the community in US, to work with the community in Europe, and most of them are the Canadian citizen, US citizen, or European citizen, so that they can be there. We are all willing and more than happy to be volunteer, whether with Canada, whoever wants to send the aid. We are willing to do it, and we are more than happy to do it to make sure that the innocent people, the people who are suffering, to reach this aid.
Our
So
government.
work with the community to make sure that the aid is going to receive by the people who need it.
There's been talks about our government about having a trip in the fall to go to northern Iraq. There's been issues raised about concerns about individual safety if there are Canadians that do travel abroad. How is the situation there?
The situation, right, it's not safe. The problem, like when the Canadian official or U.S. official, whoever goes there, they're accompanied by security, whatever you call security forces or military. So when they go, like for example, you are asking me if everything's okay, but there are 4 armed men behind you pointing gun at me. So what do you expect me to tell you? I hope you understand my point.
No, I understand what you're saying is.
So the humanitarian aid should be sent directly to work with the community, with the individual community, whether Yazidi, Assyrian, Baha'is, Kakais, and then to work with the northern Iraq so that to make sure that the aid reaches the people who need it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tabari.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Rimpel, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mirza, Murad, and Nadia, it's my understanding that the UN is not practically prioritizing UN or Yazidi refugees. Is that correct?
100%.
How long is the average wait for an interview for Yazidi presenting to the UN?
I have the evidence and I have some of the UN paper with me, and as I said, I am willing to show anybody.
What evidence is that?
Is the UN paper that when like first initial meeting, they give them certain amount of like whether months or years.
How
to
long
come
is
for
that
the
wait?
next. So for example, now we have some families are waiting. Their next appointment is in July 7, 22.
2022.
Yeah.
Do you have evidence to that
Yes,
effect?
I do have it with me.
Would you be willing to table that with the committee?
Yeah.
Excellent. Given that you showed evidence of the treatment, persecution, and discrimination of Yazidis in refugee camps, is it practical for refugees to for us to expect Yazidi refugees to remain in camps until 2022?
The problem is that most of the UN staff, as Sister Nadia said, like the UN is not helping because most of the UN staff are Muslims, and they don't like us. Whether we say it, unless we lie to ourselves, they don't like us.
So to
They
be
don't
clear
treat
for
us
committee,
equally.
has the Yazidi people experienced discrimination by UN refugee processors?
Yes. How come like there's like a Yazidi family and there's a Muslim families, and the Muslim family goes, they give them 1 year, and then the Yazidi family give them 5 years. So what kind of equality is this?
Nadia, would you like to comment on this?
Murad.
I can comment on that. I mean, the truth is that not many Yazidis have been able to be processed through the entire refugee systems. As you know, there are millions of refugees from all the backgrounds. I think what we know as Yazidis is that not many Yazidis have been able to resettle. That's even actually, so initially about 65,000 people made it to Turkey. That's on August 2014. Those people were giving very long interviews. And even now, we have about 4,000 people in Turkey. Again, the situation is still the same. The fact is that people are being unable to come. And that's why we are asking for a specific program. Yazda now, we are helping the Australian government to relocate to resettle the Yazidi Syrians. We've registered about 200 people, will be about 300 people. Those are the remains of the Yazidis who migrated from Syria to Iraq. So we are working with the Australian government to bring them directly without going through the UN system. That's why I said in my testimony, we would like Canada to have a special quotas so we can bypass all these long, lengthy processes.
The government's current policy is to rely solely on UN lists to process government-sponsored refugees. The government has also said that we should turn a blind eye to religion in terms of processing refugees. Given your testimony, is that practical?
Well, I think, when a Yazidi were on August 3rd, where they put on site on the road, and based on their religious identity, if there were Yazidis, the men were killed, and the children were taken into the training camps, and the women were enslaved. I think it's unfair that the world will not look into the identity. I think it's important that we understand that yes, everyone suffering in the region, yes, there's a big tragedy in the region, a big humanitarian crisis in the region, but the fact also that the religion was a big factor. ISIS is a Sunni group that is used the radical Sunni interpretations of Islam, and it's committing crimes against people who oppose its ideology. And it comes on the top of that list, the Yazidis, the Christians, the Shabak, and the other minorities, and the Sabians. So it will be unfair, I think, for any country to not take that into consideration At the same time, I believe in human equality. But in this particular case, I think if we are trying to prioritize the process, I would also look into what group they are from, but at the same time, what victims they are. For example, people like Nadia, people who were orphans, people who lost a husband. So the identification, I think, also should be based on what they've witnessed.
The Canadian government has said that it is unwilling and is currently not tracking the success of our refugee programs based on who is coming into the country in terms of ethnicity and religion. As part of your recommendation, would you recommend that the government track and report, as part of the system that you're talking about, the number of Yazidis that are coming to Canada, both through private sponsorship and government sponsorship streams?
You know, I think accepting vulnerable communities, groups, or individuals is the right approach to take. And I think it will not hurt if you say that those people were, for example, Christian, Yazidis, or whoever they are. I don't think that necessarily means that you are discriminating against them. I don't think it's a wrong approach to look to the people's background, the region, the religion, the race, for example, the LGBTs. So it's important that you look into this, because the discrimination in that region is based on these factors. I think the problem is looking from our approach to what's happening in the Middle East is not the right approach. I think we have to deal with the facts the way they are.
Would you, with the time that I have remaining, would you characterize the process that the UN is currently using to produce lists to support governments such as Canada in bringing government-sponsored refugee to Canada? Would you characterize that process as flawed in terms of its ability to protect Yazidis and vulnerable minorities and persecuted minorities?
Yes, it's a flawed and it's unfair, and it's unacceptable what is happening through the.
Would you characterize it as flawed?
Yes.
Mirza?
Yeah, yes.
Yes?
Yeah, sorry.
And I just have 10 seconds left, so yes or no?
What the UN is doing, actually the UN is not giving equal rights, and we hope that Canada could recognize that, and Canada could give us, like my colleague said, give a quota to the ESD.
And final word to Nadia, would you characterize the UN process for selecting refugees as flawed, and would you characterize it as being able to adequately protect Yazidis? Yes or no?
Yes. Whether you're talking about the Yazidis or other minorities, yes, there should not be any discrimination among all minorities, but all the more those that have been subjected to genocides. It's not good. It is flawed. It's not good.
7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of the witnesses for their very compelling testimony and very thoughtful testimony. I think we as committee members learned a lot, and you shared a lot of information that I can't imagine, Nadia, for you to have to continue to tell your story, to relive it each and every day when you tell it, and to share that story. And I have to say, it is so tremendous what you're doing, because you're educating the world to try to make a difference for your people. And so I thank you for that. I want to focus on actually solutions. What can we do as a country here in Canada? And I think also to work with the international community as well, to say, how can we change the course of what's happening today, and even if we can save one life, it's worth it. And that would be to pay tribute to you and your people and your experiences, and to that of others who's gone through genocide. The Jewish community comes to mind, and Mr. Burson and his community's experience, and that means a lot to all of us. And I think yesterday I was in discussion with some of the committee members about the work that we do, and perhaps this might be one of the most important moments of the work that we do here at this committee. So to that end, to solutions. And Mr. Murad Ismail, you mentioned that you are working on a program with the Australian government. You talk about quota. So in your testimony, you talk about quota of 5,000 minimum of targeting in bringing Yazidis over here to Canada. Our current immigration levels for the humanitarian compassionate category is at 2,800 to 3,600 peoples. And so limitations with respect to that. So I guess the first thing then is to call on the government to increase the numbers so that we can in fact absorb at least to a degree of the people who are faced with genocide at the moment from your community. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, if you talk about if you talk about the overall solution in Iraq, it's a proxy war. It's becoming a proxy war now. The conflict needs to be depoliticized. We need to get rid of ISIS as soon as possible. This is there's the long-term solutions, the short-term solutions. I think we need to get on ISIS as soon as possible, to get rid of them, establish safe communities for people to go back, and at the same time for the people, vulnerable communities, to provide them with some sort of guarantees that this will not happen again. If you ask a Yazidi or a Christian, when will you go back to your areas, they will tell you, I will not go back unless there's international protection. And he's saying that because, in fact, in many cases, that his neighbors, who were basically next village, next door, they become they aligned themselves with ISIS when they came. So there's a lot of mistrust in the community. To build peace, you have to build peace to bring people back, and to establish peace, you also to have justice. That's why we are asking for the ICC to open this case, to look into the crimes and to bring the perpetrator to justice. I think I would prefer an approach like what Germany did. It was a very quick thing. A decision was made by the German government, and actually it was made by the state, not even by the federal government. Then the approval was received from the federal government. They created a committee. The committee went to Iraq, did the interviews very quickly in a couple months, and then we had 1,100 women to Germany very quickly. So I think it's important that we raise all these numbers to bring in refugees, but at the same time, I would prefer a targeted program.
Okay, thank you. I'm very conscious of time. I have less than 3 minutes now. I wonder if we can, as a committee, receive a proposal from you on what that program looks like with the work that you're doing, on what that work looks like in terms of the implementation of such a program for consideration. We don't have time to get into it in this committee meeting at this moment. And then also to speak to the victims. You talked about targeting victims, women, girls, orphans, children, etc., and to also highlight then what that prioritization would look like and in terms of who to target. And so if we could get a commitment from you to doing that, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Burson for my last remaining, I think, less than 2 minutes now.
Yes, I mean, for example, we have a database of 900 women, about 600 of them still in Iraq. They're exactly like Nadia's case. We have databases for the orphans that, I mean, we have a psychosocial center where all these women come to. We can create a list very quickly and provide it to you.
Thank you. Mr. Burson, thank you for Oshalam and the work in the community that you're doing. I want to go right to the solutions that you have proposed, to which you had a list of them. And specifically, yesterday we had a presentation from the UN representative who actually suggested that in places where it is not possible to get to, where we don't have a processing center, there are security issues, there is a process where you can bypass all of that. And that is to say, for Canada as an example, to waive the processing that Canada is required in order to bring the people over. Is that something that your group would support and to call on the government to do?
I have a lot of respect for the government's processes and procedures, but as someone who's grown up in Canada and lived in other places in the world, I know that we can be extremely, extremely persistent in our due diligence. I think that in terms of expediency, that accepting the UNHCR's processing and designation, I've been poring over reports from the refugee camps through northern Iraq. It is a worthwhile and expedient measure to take on.
Thank you. And there are about, I think, over 100 families, is that correct, at the moment that
There are over 100 family members in Metro Vancouver that are sponsored by about 10 or 11 private sponsorship groups that have been waiting since November for there to be some contact made with them by the Canadian government. That has yet to happen.
Correct. And you have no sense on when those families would be able to come to Canada because they cannot be processed, and you've been waiting and waiting and waiting patiently.
Sense whatsoever, and I want to point out that the Kurdish Iraqis and the Kurdish population that are existing in that whole area suffer from a high level of persecution in a similar way to the Yazidis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're over time at this point. Mr. Fragiskatos, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I echo the sentiments of Ms. Kwan opposite. All of you have shown great bravery today being here, and your advocacy is very, very important, needless to say. I was intrigued to hear of the situation facing Yazidis in the camps. Could you speak to the specific needs of Yazidis in terms of trauma? Obviously, mental health issues are at play, and specifically the needs of women. Women and children, but and I think dividing it up in terms of trauma, Mr. Misra, if you could speak to that, and Murad, and hear from Nadia as well on the perspective of women.
Well, the situation of the IDP, especially when it comes to humanitarian or medical treatment, they are in very dire situation. The problem, like at organizational level, is very hard. Like whether it's our organization or YASDA or any other organization, it's very difficult kind to provide the medical treatment that those, especially women who are traumatized, who are escaped from ISIS, is very difficult kind to do it because it's beyond our capacity. We hope that Canada, like Germany did, we hope that Canada could, like the government could provide some of those or open some facility until they do something. But the most urgency that we are asking Canada to do is to bring as many as possible of those abducted and orphaned to Canada. The ESD community here is more than willing to work with the government and to help and to provide whatever they can do it here to provide help and support. And it's very difficult. Like there are many skin disease, for example. Now we are working with some doctors from India, especially like the kidney doctors, because in the camp, the water is very like this. Human cannot drink it. It's very, very dirty. The food nutrition is very bad. So people face many types of diseases. So we are now working with some Indian doctor that they are willing, and they have some volunteer to provide some medical treatment, volunteer to take them to India for medical treatment and then bring them back. Okay. But while Canada is accepting the refugee, we hope that Canada could be the leading country in these issues. And this is the only way like the community can survive. Like those remaining KSD who you can see exist today, we are the children of 74 Islamic genocide. It's not something easy that we face. So this time ISIS is doing openly. They don't do in hide. So that's the reason we don't think that the UN needs like almost any type of investigation. They behead somebody, they put on the video, and I think some of you saw the picture. They rape a woman and then they put on the video. They put on sale on YouTube. So they show their work. There's no need to pay someone to investigate and get the information. Actually, they tell you.
Understood. Ms. Taha, if you could speak about the specific needs of women and Yazidi women in the camps, please.
Yes, for over a year I was in a camp, Kurdistani camp. There were programs to help people psychologically for survivors. I was offered that, but I did not accept. I did not go because in the camps I did not have access to food or education. No electricity, no running water. All the basic needs were not there. So I did not go because I felt that that psychological therapy would not help me if I end up going back to the camp with this situation. There were other girls with me who had very difficult psychological situations. They went to Germany. They received residence to live in. They received opportunity to get education. They've received all the basic elements of living. So they were healed from their psychological issues without getting specific psychological treatment. So I believe that receiving psychological treatment within the camps, even though it is needed, but there are factors that continue to cause these psychological things. Once you provide to them the basic foods and drinks and housing, then they would be probably healed from that.
Even those who are not in the camps face similar issues, quite traumatic, obviously. I know my colleague Randeep wants to ask a question as well, so Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Randeep.
Sure. Just to start, my full sympathies with all three of you, and for the brevity of time, I won't go into that, but it's very gracious of you and brave of you to come out and share your story, especially Nadia, you. What I want to ask is just some solid questions, if I can, to figure out how we can help you the best. First is, how are the girls able to escape from the ISIS control? If you can briefly tell on that. So I'm going to give you the questions first. The second is, what is the best way to get them out of Iraq, if they are in Iraq, to a safe third place, such as one of the UN camps? And thirdly, are there any camps run by the UN that are better than the others? For example, where you face less discrimination within the camp, any ones that are particularly better, and so we can enforce or support those more often? So I'll let you answer those. Nadia, the first one.
When it comes to girls, some of them in Iraq or in Syria that risk their lives, and some of those girls, when they are contacted by people, when they tell of their location, they receive help. There are a few Muslim families in Iraq and Syria that have helped girls, just like the family that had helped me to escape. But currently, escaping is getting very difficult because there is no possibility to contact outside families. There are no possibilities to have news about the girls. For some of the girls, for more than a year, there has been no news about them. So escaping is becoming more difficult. And when it comes to the families, the Muslim families in Iraq and Syria, this would be the only way to help them escape.
This question too, because that's very important. The smuggling networks, or the people the brokers who help, some cases they pay through third parties, and this process requires a lot of money. When I went there a couple of times, I saw many women begging for money, going from a tent to a tent, asking for $1 to be able to rescue their families, and that's something I can share more with you privately. Once the woman come back, once a woman will come back, I want to share a few things. There's absolutely no network to receive her. There's absolutely no program to receive her. She would come, and she will be first questioned probably by the police for a day or just directly. She will come to her family, and she will be let to go to her family. In some cases, she doesn't even have a person who survived. So in some cases, she would go to a cousin. When I was there this time, there was a woman who didn't have anyone, and they had to put her with a very distant relative because she had just no one survived from this genocide. So there is nothing to receive them. There is no even, simple things, $100 to buy for her clothes. I met This was before January 2015. I met one woman. She still were in the clothes that she was taken to captivity. She said she doesn't have the money to afford to buy new clothes for her. So, from the women that we see at the center, there's collective trauma that they need psychosocial program, but they need something. They need financial help. I think they need monthly salaries. Through the Iraqi government, we did the salaries for 600 of them. Each one is receiving $120 a month. But also, the Iraqi government have been giving us a very hard time to process these applications. It will be good for a country like Canada to allocate, for example, a monthly contribution to this woman so they can live with dignity. I think, asking someone to treat their trauma while they don't have a place to live, while they cannot afford food, whether they cannot afford even going to see a woman doctor, and actually a gynecologist. Many of these women come back with gynecologist problems, which they cannot afford. So that's why what Nadia said was right. I think bringing people to a different environment, that's also, you don't have to deal with other things like, stigma, so bringing them to a different environment and treat them, and then...
Thank you, Mr. Ismail. Mr. Rampell, 5 minutes, please.
Just to the witnesses physically here in Ottawa first, just for the clarity of the committee, most Yazidi refugees are Iraqi nationals. Is that correct? A majority?
Yes, there's only few thousand Syrians.
Thank you. So with that as context, to our witness from the Or Shalom Syrian Refugee Initiative, the government has put in place a cap or has eliminated the exemption for Iraqi nationals under the mission cap for private sponsored refugees. Given that you have many families who are willing to sponsor refugees through the private sponsorship stream, would it be helpful if the government reintroduced this exemption for Iraqi nationals through the private sponsorship stream?
I don't know that I can speak specifically to the Iraqi nationals. What I can tell you is that we are maxed out with 4 families right now, but I know from the sponsorship agreement holders that we work with that there is a readiness to sponsor more families, regardless of whether they are IDPs or whether they are Kurdish Iraqis. There are many more families I know of that we are searching to find private sponsors for, but that we've run out of the numbers in terms of what the government is prepared to allow.
And that would be through the private sponsorship program. Just to clarify one comment that Mr. Ismail said, your organization and others like you have identified and do have lists of Yazidis in terms of their location that could be relocated through these types of programs, correct?
Yes, and we can facilitate that. So if in case of the government, the officials here should not have any problems going to the camps where Yazidis are, we can help you to go there. It's safe, and mostly it's safe in the camps where Yazidis are, and we have a list to a certain extent for the direct victims. So I heard from the previous discussion yesterday there was some issues that the government will not be able to go because of safety. I think that should not be. Something to block the path.
Just as I pass this over to my colleague, Mr. Kent, very briefly, the government here has, stated that there should be concern for Canadian officials' safety in terms of going to Iraq, as well as NGOs. But certainly, when we look at us as a country and helping people, we also understand that there's risk to be taken. So I don't want you to walk away thinking, because of these questions, that Canada is not willing to help, because I think that we are. And I'll pass that over to Mr. Kent.
How much time, Chair?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our witnesses for your powerful testimony today, for your advice, and for your appeal for extraordinary action to rescue the survivors of the continuing genocide. And I would like to just refer back to a suggestion made by a government colleague yesterday that because of the Yazidis' ancient language and culture, they may, as refugees, face particular difficulties in integrating to Canadian society. And I would wonder, Mr. Ismail and Mr. Esmail, whether you would respond to that.
Well, no, Yazidi has no problem at all to integrate into different society. I think the Yazidis are the most, almost nation, are open-minded to live with other in just like a brother and like a brotherhood. So the ESD would have no problem at all to integrate into Canadian society as like we did. We are all we're ESD. We came back from Sinjar, and now we are. Some of us are working. Some of us are. Most of our friends are Canadian and US. We have no problem in religion. The ESDs are. We say like we are human beings. We are all like one family. We should respect one another, and we should respect God's word. So the ESD would have no problem at all to integrate into Canadian society.
Thank you.
I mean, I share the same thing. We never we have a homeland in Turkey, in Iraq, and Syria, but always we are on the move because of the persecution, and just like the Jewish people who've been all over the world, I think sometimes you don't have a choice. The Yazidis have no choice, and I think they will be integrated. They are just the results of the high school came out in Kurdistan, and probably I think the first 3-4 schools are all. The Yazidi schools are on the top. So the Yazidis are not, it's not because they are very special, but because they've seen so much tragedy and they believe in hard work. So I think they will be integrated into community.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Zaid, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. My first question is from Nadia Daham. Nadia, I would like to thank you for joining us today and for courageously sharing your story and the plight of your people with us and also with the world. I read with interest your powerful address to the United Nations Security Council. You discussed resettlement for the most vulnerable, but also the liberation of your homeland so your people can one day return home and live in peace. Could you discuss how the international community can help bring that needed safety and peace and improve the conditions in that region?
Yes, when it comes to Yazidis, we have two issues that we ask the world of. Either they admit that genocide has taken place and that they give us safety and protection in our homeland, or they facilitate our migration. I think that's reasonable. We are no longer willing to put up with more genocides. They either protect us at our homelands or provide protection for us elsewhere so that we could live peacefully elsewhere if we have to leave our homeland.
My next question is for Murad Ismail. You mentioned the number of 5,000 to 10,000. How do you arrive at that number? And this number which you have mentioned, would you draw on people in camps or those people who are still in northern Iraq? And if still in northern Iraq, how can we gain access for the processing and the security purposes of those people?
Yeah, northern Iraq is safe. I mean, the Australian program has been done through that, so there's no problem. The German program, people went to the northern Iraq, to Duhok, and they processed it. It's not an issue to go to northern Iraq and process the applications. How to elect those 5,000 to 10,000? It's I think, as I said, the direct victims of the genocide should be given the priority, and then also the refugees in Turkey. So we can work on a recipe or some composition of people. Some people who are direct victims, some people who are in Turkey, and so I think it will not be an issue to find who are the most vulnerable. There's also access to all the camps, where, for example, the camp of Qadia, where most of the women are who escaped from captivity. That camp is in Zaho. It's accessible. Anyone can visit it.
And as we all know, unfortunately, settlement cannot be a solution for everyone in this situation. So what can we do to improve conditions on the ground? How can we help countries hosting camps to better support the population in those camps? Other than resettlement, what are the other
Yeah.
things which can be done on the ground?
Well, we have to also think about the long-term solution, as we said. Recapture all the areas. For example, we still have 30 to 40% under control of ISIS. Establish a safe zone or international protection or some sort of administrative and security parameters to ensure that no future genocide will occur against the Yazidis, Christian, other minorities. So we have to think about a long-term solution. We thought that the recognition of the genocide through the ICC will probably provoke the international community to set up these parameters for the future of the Yazidis and others. That's why we are focusing on that. So we need to think about the long-term solutions. At the same time, resettle some people and then provide humanitarian aid. Go to a camp and tell them when was the last time you received like dry food, such as rice, sugar, flour. They will tell you the last time we received was 6 months ago. I mean, this is something could be purchased in Turkey, in Iran, or other countries and could be given to the people. So there are, I think, immediate humanitarian aid that need to be provided.
Same question to Mirza Ismail. What do you recommend? What are you?
For the long term of that, Canada could work with other ally like US and other European like UK to create to support a creation of an autonomous range for the Yazidi and Kildua Syrian Christian. This is the only way we can survive in Middle East. Because both government, the central government were in Sinjar allegedly to protect them. They defeated in June. And the KRG had more than 10,000 of its Peshmerga. They say the Iraqi government failed, so the Sinjar has to be a part of KRG now. We're going to protect you. But when the ISIS attacked, in fact, many of the Peshmerga and of the local Kurds joined up with ISIS and killed their Yazidi neighbor. So we lost trust in our neighbors, both the Yazidi and Syria. We hope that Iraq is a federal government now under the new constitution. If a region that wants to have a separate administration, then they are allowed. But they don't accept because we are Yazidi and we are Christian, they don't accept it. So that needs intervention of international community to work with the Iraqi government, with the KRG government, because neither of them is only by the word of the mouth. They say we are democratic, but in fact they are not democratic. They are the most dictatorship we have seen it is the government now in place, the local government and the national government. So
thank you.
They need international support to create a safe zone for the Yazidi and Christians so that they can. And also we hope that Canada could provide them military training.
Thank you.
We have more than, at least now in Sinjar, there's 2 Yazidi forces. We have more than like 15,000 men, women, they are protecting their land and family, and same thing with the Christian to provide military training to those and create the safe zone for them.
And there will be an opportunity if there's additional information and recommendations that you'd like to provide, please do so through the clerk of the committee. We would welcome any information that you didn't have an opportunity to bring forward. I'd like to thank the panel for their powerful testimony. In particular, I'd like to thank Ms. Nadia Taha for your courage in sharing the personal horrors of genocide that you've experienced, for sharing your insights and for your recommendations. Thank you so much. And we will now suspend for a couple minutes for the second panel to arrive.
I mean, it's got a face with a.
Welcome back. And appearing before us today in the second panel are Ms. Gloria Nafziger from Amnesty International, Mr. Chad Walters and Mr. Paul Tolnai from Foundation of Hope, and Ms. Christine Morrissey from Rainbow Refugee, who will be sharing her time with Mr. Dylan Mazur of the Vancouver Association for Survivors of Torture. Thank you for accepting the invitation to appear before our committee. And I'll begin with Ms. Nafziger. 7 minutes, please.
Yes. Good morning or afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon. Amnesty International would like to thank the Honourable Committee members for the opportunity to comment on the important subject of how Canada can best support vulnerable groups in inaccessible regions. Our briefing will provide some background on the issue of vulnerable groups, with a particular focus on internally displaced people, or IDPs. Before offering recommendations for immigration reform or suggestions to better assist these populations, I'd like to review some of the international law standards and background. Unlike the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol, which provides special protection to individuals seeking asylum who are outside their countries of origin, there is currently no global binding international law instrument specifically addressing the plight of IDPs. However, this does not mean that international law is silent on the issue. General international human rights law and, where applicable, international humanitarian law establish clear obligations for states to protect IDPs and other vulnerable populations still residing within their countries of origin. Furthermore, the specific protection needs of IDPs and state obligations towards them have been clearly delineated in soft international law instruments as well as certain binding regional instruments. Although efforts to further develop an international legal framework for IDP protection have focused primarily on articulating state obligations towards IDPs located within their own borders, international law has long recognized the crucial role of international actors. According to the UN Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, international humanitarian organizations and other appropriate actors have the right to offer assistance to IDPs and the consent cannot arbitrarily be withheld. The principle and that right of civilian populations to receive humanitarian relief have been recognized by the International Committee of the Red Cross as reflecting customary law applicable in both international and non-international armed conflicts. There is therefore a clear recognition that under international law, international actors have an important role to play in responding to the protection needs of IDPs. In many, even most circumstances, state authorities have played an active role in persecuting groups under their jurisdiction and cannot be relied upon to fully protect these populations. Even when they are willing to aid IDPs within their borders, states often suffer from institutional incapacity due to conflict or natural disasters. And the sheer number of IDPs can often prove overwhelming to international aid efforts as well. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, the number of conflict-related IDPs has surpassed the number of refugees every year since 1990. The center also found that the number of conflict-related IDPs has increased significantly in recent years, reaching the astronomical figure in 2015 of 40.8 million persons internally displaced by conflict. Responding to the protection and humanitarian assistance needs of IDPs requires an action on many fronts. A comprehensive response certainly must include responding generously to UN appeals and providing expertise and training to national institutions. For Canada, it should also include facilitating legal migration to allow individuals to escape situations of generalized violence and targeted persecution. As a part of its response, Canada could consider the following measures: ensuring that visa policies does not serve as a barrier to individuals accessing protection in Canada, either by lifting visa requirements for countries with significant protection needs or ensuring there is an alternative procedure for individuals seeking to travel to Canada to access protection. Enhancing family reunification schemes by removing financial barriers to families in Canada who wish to sponsor family members who are IDPs and living in refugee-like situations. Canada could adopt a broader definition of the family for the purpose of family class sponsorships, again with respect to IDPs. Very important, eliminating the excluded family member rule to ensure that initial omissions in immigration applications do not necessarily lead to lifelong separations. This would be true for IDPs and many refugees. Canada could permit private groups and groups of 5 sponsorships for individuals who are internally displaced. There is a need to streamline the application process and forms that are used in sponsorship referrals, as the current system is often onerous for private sponsors and unable to be responsive in a crisis. Canada can consider other humanitarian admission programs, including the flexibility in the provision of student and work visas. Being flexible also in the provision of temporary residence permits, which would allow one to travel to Canada where a refugee claim may be likely to follow. And finally, providing the necessary resources to visa posts, which are responsible for processing all applications. In addition to reviewing the current resettlement and family reunification programs, the committee could also recommend the creation of new immigration programs designed specifically for vulnerable groups still residing in their countries of origin. In the past, Canada has done so through the programs such as the Political Prisoners and Oppressed Persons class and more recently the Source Country class. The latter was repealed in 2011. Amnesty International supports the reintroduction of a source country program based on objective risk criteria. A government review of the source country class identified a number of shortcomings in that program, including resource constraints, where a reliable case referral mechanism does not exist in a particular country. A reformed program with strong coordination with humanitarian partners could play a very important protection role for IDPs. The source country program was limited to specific countries which were listed through regulatory amendments. We recommend a more open approach, not limited to designated countries, which would allow the government and humanitarian partners to be more flexibly responsive to situations and case processing of need. And let me close by saying that while what is perhaps obvious but nonetheless very relevant, it is so important that Canada open up flexible programs that respond to urgent protection needs of IDPs and other vulnerable groups, and doing so by including a source country program. None of that, however, should ever detract from the resources and the commitments that are made to our current refugee protection and resettlement programs.
Thank you, Ms. Nafziger. I'd like to remind the witnesses that they have 7 minutes for their opening statements. Mr. Walters and Mr. Tolnai, 7 minutes.
Mr. Chair, honorable members and guests, it is a pleasure for us to be here today on behalf of the Foundation of Hope. My name is Chad Walters. I am a board director with the Foundation, and I'm here with my colleague Paul Tolnai. We are grateful for this opportunity to share with you today our experiences and to contribute to your study on this matter. In addition to my role as a board director, I have also completed research on the topic of gay-identified refugee claimants and their experiences throughout the refugee status determination period. Thus, what I share with you today is an expression of my knowledge in both of these capacities. The Foundation of Hope's vision statement is a world where LGBT+ refugees and newcomers can live freely and be themselves. We are a registered charity providing financial assistance to other Canadian charities actively supporting LGBT refugees and newcomers. We are a working volunteer board that is the first of its kind in Canada and possibly the world. From the beginning, we recognized that a tremendous amount of resources are needed to help people find the freedom they need to be themselves. We saw a need for a fundraising organization that does not work directly with individual cases of LGBT persecution. Therefore, our goal is to enable and empower those who do by providing targeted funding. Under our charitable status, the Foundation is legally required to direct all its charitable contributions towards other Canadian charities. Our mandate is to ensure broad representation exists to meet the needs of LGBT refugees and newcomers. This includes not only offering funding for private sponsorship applicants, but also support for our newest Canadians once they arrive to their new home. We believe there are emergent benefits that the Foundation can foster through collaboration with charitable organizations that share common interests. The goal is for the Foundation of Hope to be the primary contact for Canadians who want to financially help organizations that fall under our mandate. This allows organizations to focus on providing services rather than fundraising.
Mr. Chair, in our first 2 years, we raised well in excess of $100,000, mainly through our flagship event, Strut, where we invite participants to walk a mile in shoes they normally wouldn't wear. After all, a mile in someone else's shoes is better than a lifetime in the closet. To date, we have granted nearly $50,000 to partner charities. This includes Rainbow Railroad of Toronto, who work directly with LGBT people who need to get out of danger, Mosaic in Vancouver, who provide peer and mental health support to LGBT refugees once they are in Canada, eGale in Toronto for targeted LGBT youth newcomer support services, and the Inland Refugee Society of Vancouver, who offer emergency housing for LGBT refugees and newcomers. One of the most heartbreaking stories was from earlier this year, when we received an application for funding from the Iranian Railroad for Queer Refugees. They were seeking financial support to create a network of activists for Iranian LGBT asylum seekers in Turkey, who face specific discrimination not only for being LGBT, but also because of language and cultural issues. In fact, despite this legitimate charity receiving Government of Canada funding for some of their projects, the Foundation of Hope had to reject their application because IRQR was not a registered Canadian charity. Our friends with Rainbow Refugee, who you'll hear from later, have informed us that they are also in a similar situation where they cannot request funds from us for their important work because they have yet to receive charitable status. This limitation for tax purposes has needlessly hindered the Foundation's work, and one of our recommendations would be for the government to provide specialized charities, such as the Foundation of Hope, with the ability to give legitimate charities which either do not have or are in the process of acquiring their registered status.
And again, As a master's graduate student of social work whose research focused on the experiences of gay-identified convention refugees, I have obtained an understanding of various challenges claimants face. Recommendations I would make based on my research and the narratives of the 5 participants are: first, ensuring substantial LGBT competence training for immigration lawyers and officials. Hearing things like, "but you don't look gay," is commonplace for claimants. Their journey to safety in Canada begins with doubt and disbelief, and we need to start from a place of trust. It is imperative that the way one looks is not a factor in one's credibility as LGBT. As it stands today, claimants are still required and encouraged to perform gayness in ways that may not feel authentic, in order to appeal to stereotypes that are entrenched in the refugee apparatus. Passing as straight was a strategy for survival in their home countries, and expecting stereotypical mannerisms here is expecting falsity, and in an atmosphere where credibility is constantly questioned, we should not create a situation where we demand that claimants are acting anything other than authentically themselves. Second, to reconsider asking claimants the question, when did you realize you were L, G, B, or T? This question assumes a clearly defined moment of realization in one's life. It is not something that can be easily answered and was distressing to some claimants. At times, claimants were made to choose an age arbitrarily in order to make clear narrative. This speaks to a dissonance between claimants' authentic stories and the requirement to match lawyers and adjudicators' understandings of LGBT lives. Third, explicit mention of sexual orientation and gender identity as reason for protection, as opposed to including SOGI peoples in the category of a particular social group. Explicit mention further legitimates these claims and moves toward greater inclusion and acknowledgement of this vulnerable group.
So, Mr. Chair, on behalf of the Foundation of Hope and our partner charities, we offer our heartfelt thanks for extending this opportunity to meet with the committee this summer, and that you extended this committee into the summer. It shows the truly nonpartisan support of this House on this critical issue. Mr. Walters and I will welcome any questions.
Provide 7 minutes to Ms. Morrissey and Mr. Mazur. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much to the committee for the invitation. I'm honored to share this place with Rainbow.
My name is Dylan Mazur. I am the Executive Director at the Vancouver Association for Survivors of Torture, otherwise known as VAST. For the past 30 years, VAST has been providing trauma-focused psychological counseling for refugees who arrive in British Columbia with psychological trauma as a result of torture, political violence, and other forms of persecution, including on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. In the realm of refugee protection, we believe that persecution on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is unique from other forms of persecution in the enumerated grounds of the Refugee Convention, such as nationality and political opinion. And why is it unique? First, there is black letter law in over 1/3 of the countries in this world that criminalizes homosexuality or the promotion of homosexuality. For LGBTI communities, this means that their own government has enacted legislation that criminalizes their identity, legislation that criminalizes this most fundamental form of human expression, the expression of gender and sexuality. Second, persecution on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is unique because it is not reserved for contexts of armed conflict or political violence. It takes place in any context, in all contexts where identity is criminalized. And so these unique circumstances, we believe, requires a unique response. And first is to deem all LGBTI communities in contexts in which their identities are criminalized as vulnerable groups, and to not use armed conflict or political violence as an indicator of vulnerability, but rather not use the context whether or not their identities are criminalized.
So I am the co-founder and
volunteer with the Rainbow Refugee Society that was begun in the year 2000 specifically to support LGBT refugee claimants and now asylum seekers because of the basis of their persecution being their sexual orientation, gender identity, and HIV status. As Dylan has said, and clearly as has been recognized by the federal government, you're aware and I'm aware that members of the LGBT community are in fact vulnerable persons. And this is reflected in the fact that in 2011, the federal government initiated a pilot for the sponsorship of folks seeking asylum because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. It's a national program. We form constituent groups and work with sponsorship agreement holders. We currently have groups that are working initiatives in Halifax, Ottawa, Toronto, and BC. The constituent groups raise funds for 9 months and provide support for 12 months, while IRCC RAP provides 3 months' worth of funds and a startup package. These sponsorships do not affect the quotas of the SAWS, nor are they limited to specific geographic areas. Since 2011, there are 70 LGBT individuals that are being sponsored, some of which are couples. Several of them are blended visa office referrals, and with Rainbow Refugee Project sharing the cost. Approximately $1 million has been raised over the past 4 years by these constituency groups. The need to continually renew this project does not work. At any point, the project could end. Regularizing this project will enable LGBT folks to continue to sponsor members of a very vulnerable population.
And while we're addressing refugee protection here, we also are aware of cases and have worked with people in which leaving their home countries will actually increase their vulnerability. So what we are recommending is a pathway in which LGBTI people can use the private sponsorship pathway that is existing with Rainbow Refugee and other groups across the country to apply through humanitarian compassionate grounds for protection by the Canadian government. And the reason for this is that they may be leaving one country that they're criminalized in order to seek refuge in another, and that increases their vulnerability. So we're recommending a pathway in which they can apply for H&C status through the private sponsorship means.
So while there has been reference made to source countries, the procedure that we have had in the past in our immigration legislation, we're actually talking about vulnerable groups being identified regardless of the country, rather than having countrywide blankets, so that folks are able to make applications and have those applications processed in their home countries. Every day I receive emails from members of our communities from several of the 73 countries that criminalize sexual and gender minorities, including the 10 that have the death penalty. While the majority of LGBT refugees are not in accessible places geographically, our position is that because there are very few, if any, safe places for our members, for members of our community to access UNHCR and Canadian visa officers, that this is what creates the inaccessibility. Lesbians are particularly vulnerable as women, often because of their inability to travel. Some have no access to Canadian visa officers outside of their home country. Consider the following situations. A gay man from Uganda often goes to Kenya, where the legislation is identical to that in Uganda. A Syrian lesbian couple goes to the United Arab Emirates. A transsexual Singaporean may need to go to Malaysia, and vice versa. In all of these cases, there is no safe access. I want you to imagine that you have fled your country because of a fear of persecution because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. You have no contacts, no friends. You are not able to access any support agencies. You may be able to work legally, you may not. You may have had to apply for a visa to enter the country and have only 6 months, or in some cases, only 2 weeks in which to stay in that quote, host country. Depending on where you have been able to go, you face processing times that create excessive hardship and danger over prolonged periods of time. Currently, LGBT applicants that we are sponsoring face some of these unacceptable time lengths. And so, for example, people that we're sponsoring that are currently in Pakistan face a 6.25-year wait. From Kenya, in Kenya, they experience 6 years. In Egypt, 4.5. In Cambodia, 4 years. Although UNHCR has developed guidelines for the interviewing of LGBTI individuals, most applicants are terrified that they will be interviewed by someone who is homophobic. Despite this, some do approach UNHCR. However, the others do not.
Thank
and
you.
we as constituent groups do have experience in assessing credibility.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the panelists for their introductory remarks, and we begin with Mr. Sarai. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Vas coming from British Columbia. I wanted to ask, maybe I'll start with Gloria first, if you can, Canada is used to have a category of refugees that were identified by source country. This allowed persons to present an application for resettlement within their country of origin without a UNHCR referral. What are your thoughts on this? If you can let us know what you think. What do you think the advantages or disadvantages of that category
Well, there
were?
are serious advantages to the country, and I think my friends who have articulated that need, particularly for LGBTI claimants, without a doubt. There are some people for whom leaving a country is actually more dangerous than staying in their country. And the ability to have a tool or a mechanism that can identify people who are at risk within their country, I think, is absolutely critical. Canada was viewed as a leader, in fact, when it introduced the concept of a source country program, because it really does fall outside of the remit of a refugee program. And there's no effective and easy tool currently that helps to identify people in that situation. In the course of work that we do, we work with many human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, people for whom they are in hiding and can't leave. The challenge in the program is finding adequate referral agents, organizations, individuals that have the capacity, the willingness, and the ability to refer cases to determine who of those source country individuals are those that are most vulnerable, because I think the criteria of most vulnerable still always has to apply. So I think the challenge therein is actually finding the referral agency and the screening and the applications. But I don't think that that should be a barrier to the introduction of such a program. It need not be geographically based. I think the suggestion that I heard where it could be open and flexible to countries where there is a need is an important one.
Thank you. This question would be to Mr. Walters. You said that many LGBT community members are asked to demonstrate their quote-unquote gayness. Is that the UN or is that Immigration Canada asking them to demonstrate that?
All these folks that I interviewed for this project were inland refugee claimants. So that's on the Canadian side IRB.
On the Canadian side IRB. What is the best way you think that the government intake workers would be able to satisfy or find out that that is that they are a member of the LGBT community without offending them or putting them in an awkward situation? What would be some suggestions you'd think? Because obviously they have to demonstrate it in order to be a refugee. But what would be a more comfortable, more socially acceptable way for somebody in the LGBT community to be asked and to get a truthful answer out for them?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, and if I just listen to the voices of the folks that I interviewed, none of them said that they didn't want to have to, prove their membership to the community. Each actually supported that requirement. It's just sometimes the way that it was approached was perhaps overly personal, like asking about quite specific sexual situations. Yeah, I'm not sure.
If I may, actually, for the purposes of what you're studying today, this is fantastic that we have Rainbow Refugee here. We've done the work for you. When we do a private sponsorship, we're pretty sure that they're gay or LGBT or part of that umbrella. We've done the work. Easy.
The problem with that is, though, you still need to have somebody in Immigration Canada, Citizenship and Immigration, that will have to verify that. But it would be good for cultural sensitivity to know what are the appropriate ways to ask. I mean, they're asked for heterosexual
An
couples
LGBT
as
person
well.
can't come up to me if I'm a refugee and say, "Are you LGBT?" I'm sorry, it's not going to work. That's why the private sponsorship scheme that we're proposing that needs to be normalized is the best way for you to do it.
Okay. This question is for, actually, I'm going to pass, I've got only a minute and a half left, and I'm going to ask Mr. Fragascatos just to take the last minute and a half.
Yeah, thanks very much. Try saying Vishnevsky, but I want to ask.
Actually, Vjesnevsky.
Oh, storyboards. That's fine. I want to ask about the pilot project. I read a CBC report published in 2015. Between 2011 and 2015, only 32 individual refugees had been helped by this project, yet it started in 2011. So I just wonder, and I've heard from my own constituents. In fact, a friend of mine works for a settlement agency in London, Ontario, the city where I'm from, and the city I represent here today. And according to him and according to people, and his primary responsibility, I should clarify, is to work with members of the LGBT community, those who come and are refugees and require support based on that sensitivity. He said this program was not very well advertised, wasn't promoted on government websites. Can you speak to that? Because over 4 years, for only 32 individuals to be helped is quite surprising. In principle, the program is great, but why so little help?
I would say several things. One is that I'm assuming that the numbers that he's giving are those that have actually arrived.
Okay.
The processing is so long that, in fact, while we have between those who've arrived and those who are still in the pipeline, there are 70. My stats show a minimum of 70. So that's one issue. The second issue is that we're all volunteers. We have no infrastructure. When this pilot project began, I asked the federal government at the time if we would be able to get some funding to establish an infrastructure. We have no infrastructure. We have no office. We have no telephones. We have no money for advertising. We have absolutely no infrastructure whatsoever.
Ms. Morrissey, if I can ask about the funding.
Yeah.
This is a $100,000 program.
Yeah.
How much was allocated since 2011?
I actually don't keep those statistics because the 3-month varies according to province because they're welfare rates. I know that during the period of time we have not depleted that budget.
Okay, thank you very much. It would be interesting to find out, but I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos. Ms. Rumpel, 7 minutes.
And I'll be splitting my time with Mr. Soroya. So very briefly, to Ms. Morrissey, I was wondering if you could perhaps clarify or expand upon your comments around the processing or selection or identification of LGBTI refugees using the UN selection process. We've heard from other groups that there may be difficulties or inadequacies with that particular process, and given that we use the UN list to select government-sponsored refugees, did you just want to sort of complete your thought on that? Or should we be relying solely on those lists in terms of identifying LGBTI refugees to come in through that stream?
I would say clearly absolutely not. for two reasons. First of all, I would say the UNHCR has begun to do work in terms of identifying appropriate interviewing processes and interviewing questions. So there has been some work that's done. However, it's in a booklet on paper, and it doesn't necessarily filter down to the person who's actually doing the interview. So from that point of view, it's problematic. The second piece that we've heard from other witnesses as well is the problem is how long it takes to get an interview. And especially if you're looking at somebody who's, for example, somebody who's gone from one hostile country to another, having to wait 2 or 3 years even to get an interview. So solely using the UNHCR process is totally inadequate. I think the private sponsorship process is much more appropriate for the folks that we see without excluding the UNHCR process.
Mr. Walters, did you want to expand upon that thought based upon your experience?
When we're talking about the sponsorship that Chris just referred to, I feel like I think as members of the LGBT community, there's kind of a way of communicating or understanding or empathizing with experiences of other LGBT members. So it's almost like I don't know exactly how to express it, but it's almost like you can identify in a way. So
absolutely,
it's like, if, let's say, there was an I or B member or, an adjudicator who was of the LGBT community, I think there would be an easier way of knowing whether or not that person is or is not. I don't know.
I understand what you're saying. It's a member of the community. It's sort of this intangible, but
yeah, it is.
I think that's very valuable for us in terms of recommendations for coming out of this committee. So thank you, and I'll pass my time over to Mr. Soroya.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all coming in. And very difficult subject, and I worked with a number of LGBT persons in many times of my life. It's always difficult even to start where you start. Somebody mentioned, I think Ms. Morsi said a death penalty because they were lesbians and gays. How do you help them? How do you raise some money, give them the money? How do you help from sitting in Canada to the other countries?
Well, I mean, we use the current process that's in place, and so it means that somebody from Iran or Yemen or Sudan, Saudi Arabia, they have to take the initiative of actually leaving their countries and going to another country. So we're not in a position to be able to do anything financially to help or support them during that process. It's their job and their responsibility to leave their home country and to travel to a host country where they have to survive during however long the processing takes. We don't have any money. We don't have any funds. The money that is raised goes directly to the applicants once they arrive in Canada as permanent residents.
The question for Gloria here, Amnesty International, you guys doing a good work, and you have 7 million people helping out with 150 different countries. You mentioned Canada should help legally escape for IDPs. What do you mean? How do you escape? How do you legally escape from these people? How can the government help out to escape these people?
Legal pathways for people who are inside their country to actually leave the country and come to Canada. So the biggest barrier for most people in terms of legal pathways is more flexibility with respect to various visa requirements, different types of immigration-related programs that can provide legal pathways for people to move through across borders. So I mentioned a number of different legal pathways that people could take advantage of that which would require more flexibility in terms of the immigration programs that we currently already use. But when we're looking at vulnerable people, people who are at risk, we sometimes need to think about a broader definition of family.
I think we're talking about, is that what you're talking about, the immigration Section 25 for the Immigration Act. Is this what can help out? Is this what you can bring up?
Humanitarian and compassionate applications that individuals are able to have access to is another tool that's already at the government's disposal. To make better use of the application is definitely another route that individuals can take.
The last question is for raising $1 million and $100,000 for your project, for your humanitarian situation, and especially I worked with some of the people from Iran. The number of very difficult situation they're in, and I know, Ms. Morsi, you're working with them, and I know you're helping those people. If you want to talk about a little bit more on it.
Well,
20 seconds, please.
The $1 million comes from the fact that as private sponsors, they have to raise sufficient money to support them for 12 months. And so if you look at cities like Vancouver, I averaged $15,000 for supporting an individual. Times 70. We do not allow people to submit applications until they have raised that money, because we cannot put the sponsorship agreement holders in jeopardy.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan, 7 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your presentation today. I think I heard from pretty well everyone touch on the issue around source country, and that as a remedy to addressing some of the challenges that we face for vulnerable groups. So if I can sort of focus in on that piece at the moment. Chris, are you suggesting that the source country category be reinstated, and for the LGBTI community to be specified as a vulnerable group within that, and so that they could make access to resettlement applications?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. And given the challenges, I'm also suggesting that happen with LGBT folks that are actually connected with a private sponsor.
Okay, and that the that identification is not tied to the country of origin, but rather to the laws that exist within that country. So, for example, for the LGBTI community, if it's deemed to be illegal, as an example, then you would then identify that as a country of access to the source country classification.
Yeah, so if you're a member of the LGBTI community and you are a citizen of a country that criminalizes you because of your sexual orientation, that satisfies the country of origin challenges. And then what remains is the assessment of the credibility of the applicant.
Okay. Now, one of the things that we heard yesterday from both the UNHCR and from government officials is that they actually don't track vulnerable groups. And so in this instance, we're talking about LGBTI communities. They have no idea who is coming in that is identified with that group, and they have no idea who's coming into the country that are identified with that group. So to our colleague's point about, number of cases and how you're processing, I would say that you're doing better than the government on that score. But with that being said, how can we overcome this problem? Right? Do you have any suggestions as to how can we address that in terms of dealing with that? Would that be through then the private sponsors who can make identification, and for that to be processed perhaps through Rainbow or through any other organizations in that way? And so how can we address this issue of not being able to identify the groups, and therefore, if you can't identify them, how do we provide assistance?
Go ahead.
Okay,
a little
Paul.
bit
Sure.
to start. It's interesting. Just as the Foundation of Hope, we actually are reached out to by people who are in need of assistance. It's amazing when you don't have to go into a UNHCR camp, when you don't have to go into a embassy or a consulate. These people on the internet, they reach out very quickly to us, and we identify them with a great ease. And then we pass them off to the actual service provider or to a group that can do it. But the obstacles that they have is, one, they need to find a group of people that are willing to do it. The gay community in Canada is tremendously giving. There's lots of people waiting to help. The second is they need to find the funds to privately sponsor them. Then they have to fill out the myriad of forms that Rainbow Refugee is great at helping with, but it's not good enough. There's more that needs to be done. And then we need to get the processing times down. I was reading just over Chris's shoulders that in the UAE, 7 months. Why in the UAE is it taking 7 months? It's clearly gay. Being gay is illegal there. Why is it taking 7 months to get to an interview from a country that doesn't have many other problems with it right now with regards to that issue? Why 7 months? Amazing.
So, so to that suggestion, then actually having an organization, an international organization in those countries who can help actually identify individuals or groups that can come forward with the application, perhaps through Global Canada, perhaps through Amnesty International. I don't know. No, that's not something. Okay, through groups that would be able to do this work, that would be one avenue then to help identify individuals and help make that connection.
Yeah,
Dylan?
I think that one thing that could happen is, like you say, Global Affairs could create a stream of funding for international human rights organizations. In a lot of cases in countries where being LGBT is criminalized, often LGBT organizations are very much underground, but what there does exist often is small to medium-sized human rights organizations that don't exclusively do LGBT work, but they are there on the ground. And if there were a stream in which they could protect LGBT people and document their cases, this helps to document persecution on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. That would be one means of tracking it, and then forming this international relationship between those organizations and a sponsoring organization like Rainbow Refugee. So that's one possibility.
Thank you, Dylan. Chad, did you want to add something to that?
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, we're talking about how do we identify them, but we also have to think about there's a lot of self-identifying.
Yep.
A lot of these people are coming forward, and in that coming forward, there's almost proof in their credibility because they're putting their lives at risk by coming forward, finding and seeking out these underground agencies and saying, hey, I'm LGBT. That alone is, in my opinion, proof of credibility. It's a dangerous thing to do that.
Okay. Yes, and then so I want to then go to the processing time question because you're exactly right. If you self-identify or even if you're working with a group in countries where it is a crime, then you're putting yourself at extreme risk. And perhaps one of the reasons why the UNHCR and other, UNHCR can't really quite identify people because people put themselves at risk by self-identifying. And so to that end, on the processing time, what needs to be done? Because, Chris, you talked about how, one individual leaves from their home country, goes to another country, and then they're in a no better situation. In fact, they might be in a worse situation because of the discrimination and the laws that are there. So how do we address this issue on the processing time? What needs to be done? And what is reasonable in terms of extracting someone from that situation so they don't further put themselves at further risk?
15 seconds, please.
I'm going to say that we talk from the perspective of LGBT people, and there are likely to be other groups that could be equally identified for religious reasons, for example. So I think that when an application comes in where clearly this is a group that has been identified as vulnerable, it needs to get priority. It needs to be put on top of the pile or in a separate pile and not at the bottom of the pile and work its way up to the top.
Thank you.
And that's what happens now.
Thank you. Mr. Asasi, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nafziger, thank you ever so much for your opening remarks. The clarity of what you were speaking to was very, very helpful, so I'm very grateful. Now, you started off your opening remarks by saying you are here to draw from your experience and assist us help the most vulnerable. Now, as you know, one of the issues that has come up over the course of the past 2 days has been the practice of the UNHCR, which is to recommend against countries prioritizing one group over another. I was wondering, given your lengthy experience in this field, whether you think that is a sound and prudent practice by the UNHCR.
UNHCR gives, as a matter of priority, priority to the most vulnerable. But I think we also have to understand the environment in which the UNHCR is operating. 20 million refugees, of which the UNHCR has identified just over 1 million who are in need of resettlement, of which just over 100,000 are actually resettled in any given year by the countries that step up and do resettlement. The problem is not an identification or a problem in identification in refugees to be resettled or vulnerable refugees. The problem is in having states stand up and actually come forward and be prepared to do the resettlement. The numbers are atrocious. One of the ways that Canada needs to take leadership is by, as we have done, taking leadership in resettlement. There's a global conference coming up in the UN this September where Canada has an opportunity to challenge all governments to respond to those vulnerable people that the UNHCR is putting forward, to have a distribution system where countries are required to take refugees for resettlement that are identified by the UNHCR. UNHCR is working under an incredible burden of numbers without an adequate budget to adequately do its job. The funding is voluntary. There are many, many challenges. So we can easy to criticize them for saying that they're not doing a good enough job in identifying the most vulnerable without taking a look at the numbers to see what their actual capacity is in that regard. And that doesn't even take us anywhere close to a conversation about identifying internally displaced people.
Thank you for that. Now, in another segment of your opening remarks, you alluded to the amazing work that a wide variety of international organizations are doing on the ground in various countries. One of the problems I have, and one of the recurring things I've heard in the past 2 days, is a number of private organizations which don't have a lengthy experience broaching the topic of actually going to war-torn countries and deciding to do some work on the ground. Given your experience again, and knowing of all the safeguards that have to be in place, the risks that obviously are there, the procedures, the practices, the challenges, what would you say to organizations that are saying they would like to go to war-torn countries to do their own work?
I'm not sure what the context is, if they're going to those countries in order to identify refugees for resettlement or whether they're going to provide humanitarian aid. But one way or the other, clearly, in order to enter any kind of a war situation where one is working with vulnerable people, history and depth of experience is absolutely critical. And it's a depth of experience that understands the entire context of a country, all of the political players, what the impact of bringing Western, if they are Western, organizations, individuals into a country. Sometimes your very presence on the ground can, in fact, put people more at risk than you're not being there. Amnesty International is extremely cautious when we go into any country, that we always take precautions to know that our presence, because the presence of any outsider in a community is always known to everybody else that's in that environment, what your purpose is, what your goals are, who you're working with. It takes incredible depth of political knowledge, savviness, partners. Partners, absolutely critical. Local partners, absolutely critical. The lists go on.
Thank you. Now, my final question was, at some point you also talked about the reality that we need action on many fronts to assist with the staggering number of refugees in the world. Would you kindly elaborate on that segment of your opening remarks?
Yeah. I mean, when we look at refugees, there are 3 solutions that are always talked about: local integration, return to your home community, and finally resettlement is a third option. and the resettlement option is always last option. There's always the hope that there are opportunities for return to your own country or local integration. In order for that to happen, and by without a doubt, the vast majority of people are never going to benefit from resettlement. And so we really need to be looking at what we can do in terms of capacity building in host countries or in countries, source countries, to ensure that there is stability within those countries that can realize the first two goals, which is local integration or permanent return to your own country. So humanitarian aid, development, capacity building, all of those solutions are by far the answer, because resettlement is only a very, very small part of the answer. But to eliminate resettlement from that equation would be wrong as well.
Thank you. Now, my last question is for Mr. Tolmay. You referred to a group, which is the Iranian Railroad for Queer Refugees. It's actually a group I'm quite familiar with, given the lengthy work that they've done for quite a few years. Your suggestion was that they should try to establish themselves as a charitable organization, which seems like a very sensible approach to the issue. However, as I understand currently, as long as an organization has 2 years of experience, it's not a very difficult process to actually contend with. Do you think after? I mean, are you aware of all the various requirements that are needed to establish a nonprofit organization?
For sure. Based in BC, obviously, I know from that perspective, each province will have its own intricacies with doing it. However, the federal system is somewhat homogenous across the country. And in fact, IRQR is in the process of requesting their registered status from the CRA, which will enable them to get the funding. However, in emergent situations like this, where we have a critical need immediately, that wait is unacceptable. It's yet, like when you're dealing with a 6-year wait for an interview, and now you've put 2 years on this, I mean, people will die before we get help to them.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the panel for their insights, for their recommendations, and as a Canadian, I'm very proud that because of the work of your organizations, associated organizations, your volunteers, you've put Canada at the forefront of creating a veritable rainbow railroad for some of the most victimized individuals around the planet. Thank you for your good work. And we will now adjourn. I'd just like to remind our committee members that we will be reconvening for the next session in 20 minutes. Thank you.